And welcome back to the Interfaith Roundtable. I'm Cantor Mark Perman, your host. Chuck Wolfe is recognized as a leader and pioneer in emotional intelligence. He is CEO of Wolfe Associates, a result-driven firm dedicated to improving leadership and performance among individuals and within companies. He is a speaker, consultant, author, and I thought that even though this is the Interfaith Roundtable, there is a strong link, we'll talk about that in a minute, between emotional well-being and spirituality. And that link is something we should explore. Why not right here on the Interfaith Roundtable? When you think about it, we educate children in a very cerebral and intellectually based manner. At least that's how I recall, and that's what I perceive out there. But what if we mandated classes in emotional intelligence for young people and young adults so that emotional maturity and health is finally seen as an area worthy of our collective attention? So I throw that out there as a provocative introduction. Welcome, Chuck Wolfe.
Thank you, Cantor Perman. It's great to be here with you.
Call me Mark.
I'll call you Mark. Okay, I will.
Tell me a bit about this concept of emotional intelligence. We talked a bit before the show. Emotion, when one thinks of emotion, one thinks of feeling, one thinks of intelligence, intellect. You combine the two. What does it mean?
Well, it's an interesting question because sometimes when I first start to talk about emotional intelligence with people, it almost seems like an oxymoron. You know, how can you be emotional and be intelligent? Oftentimes people think about being emotional, being emotionally hijacked. You get angry and all of a sudden you have an out-of-body experience where you're behaving in a way that just seems like that's not you or not me somehow. Mm-hmm. And yet being emotional is something that helped us to survive. I mean, it was Charles Darwin actually that studied emotion at the same time he was studying evolution. And emotions actually give us information about what's happening to us. Mm-hmm. We often think that the way you manage emotions is to control them, to suppress them, maybe even repress them, not deal with them at all. But the best way to deal with emotions is to recognize what they're trying to tell you. Sometimes emotions are not helpful for what's going on. You can't run or fight with anything as we did when we were first evolving. But now you have to somehow manage in a workplace the anger that results from something you consider unjust, but you can't speak about without possibly losing your job or at least getting into some form of trouble of some kind. So emotional intelligence was this idea that something about our emotional abilities is unique to us as individuals. We all have them, but like analytic intelligence, it's not the same. So that my ability to know how you're feeling or how people who might be watching are feeling is different than your ability to do that. I might be good, I might not be good. We don't always know. Some people think that they're very good at perceiving emotions in themselves and others, and we find out that we can assess this, and sometimes they're really not.
How do you assess? What do you have, an assessing technique or strategy or tool? Or
the pioneers in emotional intelligence were Peter Salovey, who's currently now the president at Yale University, Jack Mayer, who's a University of New Hampshire psychologist. They discovered in the late 1980s this idea that emotions form these abilities, the ability to perceive emotions, to identify it, to use emotions. This is really fascinating that we can actually plan emotionally the best emotion for a particular task. How do I want to feel coming to see you? I want to be a little excited, engaged.
You're nervous.
Well, I want to be
the
confident.
Presence of greatness. No, okay.
That too.
Emotionally
That
intelligent?
too.
No, confident, right.
Okay, but filled with humor a little bit. I mean, that actually adds to the presentation, right?
Sometimes if our thoughts say you come in and you go, oh, I don't know how I'll do and I'm worried how people will see me, right away you have these negative thoughts and they create anxiety.
Perfect. So now, so you have anxiety, but how do you change anxiety to a little bit of tension? So that's good, but not so much anxiety that you can't speak or you don't know, your thoughts get jumbled in your mind somehow. But instead you present an aura of confidence that says, I'm the master of this subject. I know this subject. I can answer your questions. I can speak spontaneously. I also come with an agenda about things that I think people should know. So these people, brilliant psychologists, Peter Salovey, Jack Mayer, they discover the ability to identify emotions, use emotions, understand how emotions work, and to manage emotions are these four branches of abilities. And they conceive of this idea that we're different. We all have unique abilities in each of these areas, and how might we measure them? Can we prove it exists, number one, because that's important to a psychologist, and two, can we measure it? And so they worked with another psychologist, David Crusoe, and they created an assessment. It's actually called, the Mayer-Salovey-Caruso Emotional Intelligence Test. I got invited to work with them in the late 1990s to help them to make this practical. Because, you know, a lot of times psychologists create research, they create models, and people never read about them, they never discover them, they don't know what to do with them.
But it's not like an IQ test where you think of where you're highly emotionally intelligent or you're on the low end, meaning you're not that intelligent. It's not a high, low, good, bad. It's sort of like where you fit on the spectrum.
Actually, it is high, low, good,
it is?
bad.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't want to know then.
Well, you know, it's interesting. A lot of smart people, Mark, don't actually perform so well on some areas.
That's
on
true.
some areas. For instance, what if you found somebody who's really good at managing their own emotions? Because within managing emotions, there are two skills. There are two tasks, they call them. One is managing your own emotions, which is how well do I manage what happens inside of me? There's also emotional relationships. How do I manage and to influence other people's emotions? How do I create relationships? How do I deal with conflict, anger, disappointment?
Right.
And what if I score really high on managing emotional relationships with others and not so high on my own ability to manage my own emotions? Typically, people experience someone who has that profile as caring about them. People who score high in this emotional relationships piece actually are often people that other people really enjoy being around.
But you know, some people, as I've discovered, you're not always sure what people are really feeling. Obviously, someone might project one particular emotion. They might want to impress you, or they might not want to hurt your feelings. And only do you find out later, maybe from a third party, how they really felt. So do you have to really develop a sense of seeing beyond what people project to what they're really feeling, what they're telling you, with their body language or their expression? You know,
Well,
not everybody puts it out there.
Let me tell you that the assessment itself gives you some insights as to where you might be more accurate than other parts of the model. So you might be really good at understanding emotions, let's say, which means that if you know you're about to introduce the subject. I work, for instance, with the Mashantucket Pequots, which is the tribe that manages foxwoods. And they had a very difficult experience when they found out that the gaming world was changing for them, where they had made enormous amounts of money year after year. It kept like be a money tree. Money kept coming and coming and coming. And then all of a sudden, more competition started to arrive. Gas prices went up. People stopped traveling. And all of a sudden, they realized that the budget that they had in place wasn't going to work. And they were going to have to start thinking about layoffs with the government, the tribal government. The tribal government was all their own relatives. So they're going to have to lay off cousins and aunts and mothers. And so think about the emotional challenge that involved.
Wow.
So by thinking about emotions and understanding emotions, knowing that this was a group of people, many of whom never had money before, always thought this would happen. And now it wasn't happening. It wasn't going to be devastating, but it was scary, and it was a hard time, and it was dealing with family, and from this glorious moment of we will never have to worry about finances to, oh my goodness, we are worried. Are the worst predictions going to happen? Not really. So I was working with them to help them to think through ahead of time how people might experience this. How do we sell this? How do we manage this? How do we make this feel not like it's a catastrophe, it's just part of cyclical business?
Or
how do we do that?
From a spiritual angle, somebody might say to you, you know, this is God's way of teaching you that, you know, you can't always be a gravy train. It can't always be easy. This is a challenge. This is going to help you towards the next level of personal growth. Maybe, you know, you think of the tribes and all the struggles they've had over the years and the oppression and then the genocide, essentially, of the Native American. And then maybe this was sort of a reward, a blessing to have this kind of easier life. But then the next step is to be challenged towards a higher level. Do you frame it in terms of challenge rather than threat to their life?
Understanding emotions helps you to think through about what people are likely to experience emotionally. And if it's not the emotions you'd want them to experience, you ask yourself, what would be ideal to feel? If you can make it spiritual, if you can make this just part of, you know, the message from above that we all need to encounter and deal with and grow with, and life was difficult for many of these people, incredibly difficult, prior to, you know, the realization of them as a recognized tribe and so forth, where they started to make money for the first time for many of them. This became...
That's a trap too, isn't it? Too much too soon, all of a sudden.
It's very hard to negotiate. People that have lived with wealth for a long period of time know how to manage those circumstances better than somebody who's nouveau rich, you might say.
I haven't had either problem, but go ahead.
Well, it was fascinating because here's a multi-billion-dollar enterprise. It's a family-owned business, though. There are 900-some families, and they all have to try and figure out how to manage this. Yeah. And they've never been wealthy before, for the most part.
Right.
So, I mean, it was challenging. But you think emotionally, you strip away the content and you ask yourself, people are going to be scared, maybe terrified. How do we get them to be more confident that this too will pass, that we will manage this successfully? That was the role I played with the tribe.
So when you look at this at an emotional level, something like cognitive behavioral therapy says, look at things first at the thought level. How are you processing it? Rearrange your thoughts and then your emotions will follow. I think it was Desart who said, for every thought there's an emotion, for every emotion there's a gesture. That's what I was taught as an actor. So do you try to neutralize it or correct it or realign it at the thought level and redirect thinking, or do you wait till the emotions come up and then try to look at it at that point?
Well, there are two ways to think about what I do for, with emotional intelligence. One is it's reactive, which is in the moment. Something strikes me and I want to just react to that.
Right.
But something says to me that I've been down this path before.
Right.
If I react the way I've reacted in the past, which is how we often do things, right? We operate in certain ritualistic behaviors.
Patterns, yeah.
So if you recognize a pattern's not useful, I mean, it might be doing something for you, but when you walk away, you realize that you really have something that needs to be cleaned up at the end.
Right.
What if you learn how to catch that quicker? So yes, you do. You catch yourself recognizing the thoughts and feelings you're having, and you say, I want to go down a different path. And you catch yourself, and you stop, and you collect yourself, and you think about, how can I say this in a different way? How can I react to this? I'm not going to let it go, or maybe I need to let it go for the moment, and we'll react to it later. So yeah, that's one way. The other is to be proactive, which is to anticipate a big change that's coming and to plan emotionally how to manage that change.
Have you ever been asked to work with like troubled people, folks in juvenile detention or criminal population, people who tend to act violently, to ask them, I mean, maybe it's naive to say, when you're getting upset and you're getting angry, take a step back. You think about in today's world when so many people have guns or use guns irresponsibly. Many, many years ago, if somebody got into an argument, there might be, a swing or a punch exchange, but now somebody will pull out a gun and shoot. Leaving aside the gun control argument, if we could help people realize and control their emotions before they get to that point, we might have a lot less school violence and arbitrary drive-by shootings, all those types of things. I mean, do you see the potential for this kind of work to
Years ago, my original career started with as a school counselor.
Right.
I worked on something called affective education, which was this idea of learning about emotions. How do you handle anger appropriately? How do you handle sadness, depression, embarrassment, humiliation? How do you handle such negative feelings in an appropriate way? How do you do that? And there were actually lesson plans that you asked in the very beginning about schools.
talk about that? Yeah.
There is right now in Connecticut, this is happening today. What I just mentioned happened many years ago, but I've stayed in touch. I like working with lots of diverse clientele. So the tribe, I worked with Exxon. I was director of leadership for the Hartford for a period of time. I worked in organizational behavior at Harvard Business School for a while. One of the things that I've learned over time is that everybody is dealing with emotions all the time. Sometimes those emotions are in the forefront. They're almost controlling, it seems like, what's happening to us. Other times, often, most of the time, they're in the background. It's only when something gets us like upset or confused or uncertainty kind of raises to a high level or there's pressure that now we step back and we're reflective a bit. But what do we do with our emotions? When are we taught about this? Mark Brackett is someone I've worked with in the past. He is now the director of the Center of Emotional Intelligence at Yale University. He's actually on my radio show. I know we're supposed to talk about that if we have a moment.
Yeah, go ahead. Talk about it.
So Mark was on my show recently because Mark has done something called emotional literacy for schools. As part of this center, again, Peter Salve is the president at Yale. Peter was the original pioneer in discovering emotional intelligence ability-based model. And Mark is a colleague of his that actually got his doctorate with Jack Mayer, the other psychologist, came to work for Peter, and now is running what is now called the Center for Emotional Intelligence. And they are committed to trying to bring emotional literacy to Connecticut schools. I've actually talked to Mary Glassman about involving our superintendent. Don't know if it'll happen. Don't know if there's an interest in schools all around, but Mark is doing some great work. I had him on my show to talk about his center, and more recently, he's done some work, the center is doing some work with Facebook and bullying. And if you're concerned about social media and bullying, then there's, if you go to Public Radio Exchange, prx.org, and you type in my name, Chuck Wolfe, W-O-L-F-E, you'll see a series of interviews that I've done on this radio show that I do as a volunteer, one of which is the most recent one with Mark, talking about the work with Facebook and bullying. If you have young children or teenage children and you're concerned about this, it's a wonderful interview, and then it'll suggest to you how you look and view the Facebook web pages that deal with bullying and what you might find there. So that's one way we can bring it into schools, what they're doing at the center.
So it seems like not only the schools, but maybe religious institutions could be involved in, integrating spiritual religious teachings with emotional intelligence. I mean, it seems to cross a lot of different boundaries. But talk a little bit about the radio show, and for those who would like to listen, it's on WPKN in Bridgeport.
Right.
You were gracious enough to have me cover once in a while.
I had you on for
the Hanukkah show.
Yeah.
But you get to interact with people, and how do you provide help and support to them when people call, without, of course, giving any? You're not going to a therapist. You're not going to do that. But at what point do you say to someone, you need emotional intelligence work, or you need to have therapy work to resolve some of these issues? And do you get into that on the radio show?
Well, in 1998 or 9, I began working with Peter Salovey and Jack Mayer and this David Crusoe in a way that I looked at what they had. They're journal articles most people aren't going to read or understand. But the model was wonderful, and I began to look at it, and I said, how do I make this practical? And so my radio show is called The Emotion Roadmap. Take the wheel and control how you feel. We have so much more ability to control our feelings, to manage our feelings, not repress them, but work with them, understand them, deal with them more effectively than most people understand. So I wanted to find a way to help people to do that. Irrespective of how you might score on these abilities, everybody can stop and ask themselves, how am I feeling? How is somebody I'm dealing with feeling? And we do this when we're stuck. So people who call on my show, this week I just had my show, and somebody called in, and he'd been married a couple times and was wondering about whether he should get married again. So I walked him through this idea of an emotion roadmap. I said, how are you feeling about it? How is the partner that you're living with feeling about it? It's very important to her, not so important to him. Well, I said, as we began to explore why he would or wouldn't get married for the third time, we began to explore what the issues were. Within 10 minutes, I'm able to walk him through about how is he feeling, what would be ideal for him and his spouse, or not spouse, but partner to feel, and what would he actually be able and willing to do. And by the end of it, he had decided to get married in 10 minutes. But mostly, a lot of times what people need is a sounding board.
So it's your fault if it doesn't work out.
If it doesn't work out, he's okay with it. I said, what's the worst case scenario? You repeat the pattern, that's okay.
So many of us, whether you... I don't want to generalize, but if you come from, let's say I do, from a Jewish background, you might have had a strong Jewish mother. You might have had people around with strong opinions about what you should do. Oh, that's not the right person for you. Oh, you need to marry that girl. Don't let her get away. Everybody's giving you advice. The thing is, they don't have to live with your choices. You do.
Right.
And some of us over the years, and I'll put that out there, we don't always trust our own emotions, our own feeling, but look to other people to say, well, what do you think? And that's a trap. But what you were doing with him was saying, I'm not going to, I might personally think, don't do it again, because, if you fail twice, you're going to do it again. But you might be thinking,
two strikes.
you might be thinking, I want to help you illuminate your truth, your inner truth, and then follow your heart, As long as that person's not, you only want to validate somebody's feelings. That what if they want to do something violent? You have to talk them out of it, even if they're feeling like they want to do it, right? But
there have been occasions I've suggested people get help from pastoral counselors, therapists, whatever. I mean, there are people that sometimes call in that are beyond the scope of obviously what I can do. But a lot of times people have the answers inside themselves, and I help them to find that through this emotion roadmap by asking, what are you feeling? What would be ideal to feel? How can you get from what you're feeling to what's ideal? And what are you really able and willing to do?
What if someone says, I don't know what I'm feeling. I'm feeling a confluence of one day I feel good about it, the next day I don't know, the next day I don't feel good, it just keeps changing. Is that sort of distortion? You have to get past that to the real authentic feelings? Or
what I do is I tell them what they're feeling. And
seriously,
seriously, even if you said that, I'd say you're feeling confused then.
Okay, conflicted, confused.
Yeah,
right?
I mean, right? I mean, isn't that how you're feeling? So somehow you have to find you want to feel clear. You want to get from confused to clear. And I'm really good at trying to help people to figure out how to use this formula.
But let us be clear, though. Is conflicted, or is that an emotion?
Sure, ambivalent. Well, there's a lot of different definitions of what's an emotion.
Right.
Some of the physical sensations of embarrassment, your face gets flushed.
Yeah.
I mean, there's different definitions, but it's sort of like for me, does it seem like it's a feeling to you? Is ambivalence a feeling? Yes, I think it is, because I'm conflicted. Is conflicted a feeling? Yes, I believe it is. Is fear a feeling? I mean, you know, we kind of talk about it a bit. There are some basic feelings like joy and fear and terror
Right.
and rage.
Yeah, right.
But beyond that, there's hundreds and thousands of words that describe various feelings.
Because say you really want to do something, we've all lived through this, but the fear can get in the way. Say if somebody helps you move past the fear or the anxiety of that situation. You know, I had fear of flying for a lot of years, and I had to get over that to see the larger goal of, you know, I wanted to go to Atlanta to take a job. I wanted to visit a friend in another part of the country. I didn't want to have to drive. So the greater good had to overcome the fear, which said, don't do it. So is that something you have to work with, fears, phobias?
Sure it is. I mean, I have some myself about heights, and I was just talking to a friend of mine.
Right.
And you know, I'm going on a trip, and I'm going to be away for a while, and one of the things is we're going to be walking across suspension bridges, which with a fear of heights, that's not a great thing to be doing.
Ooh, high anxiety.
So what he said to me, and you know, the way to change the way, you know, this is how your thoughts can influence your feelings. He said, keep thinking probabilities. Right? Keep thinking probabilities. The chances of going off are slim. It's a very small probability anything bad's going to happen. Anyway, I mean, that may or may not work for you. I try to find, like I was talking to in an executive coaching role I was dealing with, someone is a terrific leader at the level that he's at. And he's wondering, he thinks of himself as strategic because he's a chess player. And he thinks of the game as chess, as strategy, as many people do. And I said, but if you want to get to the next level, I mean, as a chess player, you're focused on every piece. But what if you're managing multiple chess games at a single time?
That's hard.
Now you can't manage all the pieces. You've got to be managing the people that are managing those games. And that, in his language, in a metaphor that worked for him, he began to see strategy in the way I was hoping he would see it, as more strategic than almost tactically the way he was looking at managing a chessboard. So that meant he had to let go and empower his people so that he could rise to the next level.
Or do you sometimes help, somebody see that that's maybe not their suit, that they should stay where they're best and most effective? You know, we all want to reach for the higher, the next level. We all have goals, we all have dreams, but if somebody is successful where they're at, could they, by reaching towards something, sabotage themselves? Do you have to help them see that, or that's not your role?
No, I mean, it depends what they're looking
Right.
for from me. One way of thinking about that is, what does your future self look like?
Right.
I have a fascinating, if people want to listen to the radio show, you can listen to it on WPKN.org as well.
Say it slower to...
WPKN.org. Next week, 12 o'clock, I'm interviewing a person named Jack Mayer.
Just to be clear, this will be airing next month, so it won't be next week.
Right, okay. So you can look for the archive.
Right.
Okay, so it's March 13th, I guess.
Right,
I'm going to be talking to March 13th. Well, anyway, it's in March, and I'm talking to Jack Mayer, who's one of these psychologists who wrote about emotional intelligence. But Jack has written a new book called Personal Intelligence, and he talks exactly about the things you're talking about. It's different, but it does talk about fit, about who you are, whether you're doing things because somebody told you to do them,
Right.
or whether you're doing things because they're intrinsically motivating to you to do. And if people have those kind of questions, his books are really, it's somewhat technical, a little bit technical, but a lot of really rich information that help guide your life in terms of the partners you choose, the choices you make, the careers you might pick. Very interesting.
My guest is Chuck Wolfe, and it's Chuck Wolfe Associates. Also very honored and proud to have Chuck and his wife Barbara as members of my congregation, his family at Farmington Valley Jewish Congregation, Simsbury. Hope I can say that.
Sure.
So we have a few minutes left, so tell everybody a little bit how they can contact you when, you know, if it's an organization or if it's an individual. Can they contact you for a family member that they think needs your help? Can they go, oh, you need to call this guy, or you don't want that?
You know, I'm happy to talk to anybody, you know, just for phone call. I'm happy to just chat with anyone. I might point, if it's a therapy situation, that's obviously something to point someone to a licensed therapist. I actually used to be a therapist, but I really like working with healthy people and helping people to stay healthy.
Wait, how do you know the difference? How do I know that I need First of all, who's healthy? Is anybody? I mean, healthy? Everybody's got
that's
issues.
an interesting point.
So how do I know whether I need what you have to offer or the therapy or maybe both? How do we know? How do you diagnose?
Well,
Well, you know what? I don't want to get away from you telling everybody how to reach you, but if you
sure,
can fit
okay.
that into your answer.
Let me just say real quick
Yeah.
about that. If somebody's hearing voices, if somebody is, incredible sadness, been depressed for a period of time,
Yeah.
probably that's something you want to call a doctor or a therapist about.
Right.
If something is troubling somebody and it's a short-term or acute kind of
Short-term,
situation, they're struggling, but maybe over a period of time, but it seems like it's something fixable, but you can't quite communicate or influence in the way you want, I can help with that.
Okay.
I can help with that. The way people can reach me is they can contact me and call my phone. My office phone is 860-658-2737, or they can email me.
Do that again. Say that number again.
860-658-2737, or my email is simply my initials, CJ, and my last name, Wolfe, W-O-L-F-E, at CJWOLFE.com. So either email or, or they can call me. Either way would be fine. To explore things. If they really like the idea of what they're listening to and they're interested in learning more, there's actually a pretty good way to actually learn about this. I'm working with a group that has, I do some workshops as well as consulting and coaching. And there's a group that's called Corporate Training that is sponsoring a workshop that I'm running called Getting Smarter About People Skills in May. So if people want to know more about that, they can also either the phone number or the email. That's coming up in May in Boston, in the Prudential Center area of Boston. It's a great place. I'm really excited about doing the workshop there. And then I do things for companies sometimes as well, if people want me to do something internally. Or train people on this assessments. I've had a wonderful group of people in California, an entire health organization, where we're training hundreds of doctors and nurses on emotional intelligence, learning about this emotion roadmap, and also using this assessment so people are finding out where they're strong and not.
Chuck Wolfe, thank you so much for joining us. It's been a great program. I think people will enjoy it. I'm Cantor Mark Perman, FEJC Emek, Shalom in Simsbury. This has been the Interfaith Roundtable. We're here every month, various times, and glad you joined us. If you'd like to reach out to me and get some information on the show as Chuck takes his call, probably looking for me, the email is, I like the music, mjperman9@gmail.com. MJPERMAN and the number 9@gmail.com. Like all kinds of feedback, pro, con, whatever it is, feel free to reach out. Thank you for joining us.
Funding for Simsbury Community Television is provided in part by contributions from viewers like you. Thank you.